established in 1630, this wonderful city that we all call home. In 1773, actually December 16th of 1773, we actually had the Boston Tea Party. People, it was the real Boston Tea Party, I like to say, the real Tea Party. But it was about taxes, unfair taxes, unfair stipulations against colonists that didn't think it was fair to be unrightly taxed. Then we can fast forward a little bit to the 1800s, because this is actually when it gets interesting. Obviously, the United States had been established 1776, but William Shaughnessy, obviously Boston has a lot of heritage with Irish people, was an Irish doctor. He invented forensic chemistry. So a lot of people talk about law enforcement. He invented forensics. He also invented intravenous therapy. So people talk about opioid abuse and things of that nature. He was also the one who pioneered medical marijuana. That was back in 1839. And so then when we fast forward to 1905, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically Wisconsin and Louisiana, were the ones that actually started requiring prescriptions to marijuana. Notice I didn't say 1911 yet, because Massachusetts was the first one to actually pass a law making it illegal. But back in 1905, North Carolina, Ohio, Vermont, Maine, which used to be Massachusetts, Montana, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Indiana, Nebraska, Kentucky, and Mississippi all essentially had what's called poison laws that essentially said, similar to having like the Surgeon General warning on your cigarettes, basically said, you know, use it with caution, don't have it around young children. But it wasn't something that was definitely anything to be concerned about. If we jump back really briefly to 1860, New York prohibited the sale of cannabis without an order by a doctor. So they weren't saying that it was illegal to use it. They were just saying that unless you had a doctor, then you could not use marijuana. Then in 1911, Massachusetts passed our law, which essentially in April 29th, actually, of 1911, was the nation's first anti-marijuana law, imposing a $100 fine and up to 6 months in jail. So this is the establishment of the mandatory minimums way back in 1911. And I'm using the terminology mandatory minimums because you're going to see a pattern that developed over time. The Mexican Revolution, just for a little bit of history, happened in 1910. So what the correlation was that this illegalization of marijuana was really based upon economics, I'm going to show, and also race. One of the big things that they were concerned about was that marijuana could make things like fiber. So you can make rope to build ships. You could also make paper. So there was actually a journalist who was very wealthy, and he wanted to make sure that that marijuana could not be used because it interrupted his bottom line. A man by the name of William Randolph Hearst. He developed something called yellow journalism, connecting cannabis to violent crime. So this is many of the things we hear. I want to borrow a full activist line, but we get stuck on replay. We start hearing these similar things, and unless you are blessed enough to live in our wonderful city of Boston, it might go over your head. You might get stuck on what the media says, but it's important to do research, especially in our age of Google and the internet. It's important to actually sit down and read and not just listen to what people say on television. But the point of where all this is going is people might have heard of the DuPont family. They invented nylon. They had a problem with hemp because hemp directly interrupted their bottom line. A man by the name of Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and this is important because if passed, the Treasurer of Massachusetts would be directly involved in the commission. But Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury for the United States, who was the richest man in America at the time, had already invested in the DuPont family and invested in nylon. So it was to his best interest that hemp be made illegal. And so without giving you a long history lesson, The point is that it's been a long time, 146 years to be exact, from 1630 to 1776. It's been about 200 years from 1776 to 1970. The significance to 1970 is that that was when Ronald Reagan started putting his hands, Richard Nixon started putting his hands on marijuana. And so we start to realize a lot of our laws are really outdated and stuck in the past. Do we really want Richard Nixon writing our legislation? Do we really need Ronald Reagan writing our legislation? I was born in 1982, so a lot of these people predate me, and I want people that are living and breathing now to be responsible for whatever laws we have, whether we like them or not, and not just tied to some past person on a painting that, you know, people have different feelings about, but certainly are not here to state their opinion. The other thing I want to also remind everyone is that because Massachusetts is a very innovative, we also forget that hemp originally was meant not just for recreational use, but also as a mode of industry. And we have the ability to use biodiesel now from hemp to make things such as oil that can fuel automobiles and things of that nature. And just so you don't think I'm off my rocker, diesel, which was invented by Dr. Rudolph Diesel in 1895, actually used vegetable oil as the methodology behind having the engine. And it wasn't until Henry Ford, everyone remembers him, made a deal with Rockefeller, with Standard Oil, that they really started making petroleum the focus. And so as we send off our fellow Americans to war overseas, as we start thinking about alternative energy sources, hemp has always been there. It's biodiesel, just like corn and everything else. And it's cheap, obviously. It used to grow right at the police station, believe it or not, years ago at B2, right? They had a field back there. This was before it was legalized. But it's like, it's not that hard to fathom that we're going to have a society where we're not dependent on foreign oil, where we can actually walk down the street, and if someone wants to smoke something to relax, that'll be okay, as long as they're not doing something violently, because we have laws for that if they commit something violent. And I just ask that we look towards history as we create the next chapter of our history, and really and hopefully come together as the city of Boston. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Covered a lot there. Is there anybody else that would like to testify here tonight before we... Oh, come on down, state your name.
Thank you, Sam.
My name's Sia Samora. I'm from Mattapan. I'm representing consumers and prospective licensee.
Okay.
And I really just want to start by thanking you both for having this hearing. This is long overdue. And I also would like to thank Shalene and Chanel and the other advocates who've been working on this for so long. This is very important. This is very exciting. So I've actually submitted a lot of information to the committee already, and I'm really just here to support everything that was said here again and stress just a few points. And those are in the interest of encouraging equity in the industry. My suggestions would be to, just as other people have said here, and use the example of Oakland, I think we have to encourage harmed communities and people from harmed communities to get into the industry, and we should provide incentives for that. We should try to continue to make as open a market as possible, which will encourage that equality. We do need to recognize the long history here, because I think that's part of the hurt that my community has been feeling, because we've been dismissed and lied about for so long. So, a lot of people don't even feel comfortable coming to the public square, honestly, because there's so much misinformation about cannabis. And when we do present information, a lot of times we're ridiculed or just told to go away. So we're so excited now that the laws seem to be changing and that we're going to be welcome in the town square again. So once again, when we're balancing policy and when people are coming before you all and the city to propose what the new policy should look like around retail cannabis, I have to urge you to be extremely careful when you're listening to the same voices who have criminalized us for so long. They're still there, okay? They're still putting out negative information in the internets and other places, and it is federally illegal. So even the federal government is still putting out tons of harmful, negative information. And so we have to combat that when we're listening to it. Prohibition comes from a long American history of racism and ignorance. And so as we move forward, we want to move away from that, and we don't want to give the same voices too much weight anymore, because we're trying to change the system. And if you do give too much weight to these voices, you're going to undermine the efforts of this law, which is to create a healthy legal market from what's pre-existing. People won't participate if they feel like it's unfair or it has the same restrictions or regulations are just being imposed to try to punish this community, or trying to make the bar for entrance to the industry too high. People won't participate. And you'll undermine this law, and you'll still have a thriving illicit market. And I've applied like I said, I've already gave a lot of materials to speak to that to the committee. There's another important thing that I think has to be said, and going forward, because of the terrible lack of information on cannabis. We are all making policy, but we don't always know as much about cannabis. A lot of times it's the consumers and advocates who've really done the work to know the history of cannabis and how people relate to it. I'm very familiar with how people relate to cannabis here. And I've spoke to many people through the years. And I think if I have to bring up one thing, it's that, because people brought up a lot of stuff here, it's that there absolutely is a protection for cannabis in a religious context or as a sacrament and in a religious environment. There absolutely is a protection for cannabis there. It's a very important part, a very integral part of most of the religions that we know today. And if you are interested in those things, it can become very important to you. So we don't like to be dismissed. There are professors right here in Boston that teach this very same information at the highest levels of education here at Boston University. There's a gentleman named Carl P. Ruck who will tell you very plainly how cannabis is very much a part of the Bible, was the ancient incense and anointing oil of the Hebrews and Christians. So in our cannabis culture, we're very familiar with this information, and when we interact and people dismiss us, we tend to withdraw and stuff. So like I said, all this information can be backed up, but because of people's personal prejudices much of the time, they're not willing to, they're just not willing to tolerate us. So I would just please be aware of that. You'll be provided. A lot of people will come to speak out against us, and like I said, a lot of this stuff is unfortunately based in the lies of prohibition and reefer madness, and just a lack of knowledge about cannabis, because they may not be cannabis consumers, and they've been subject to years and years of this stuff. The DEA has been lying to us for so long, and people say, well, why was the DEA lying? How could they do that? Well, they had a mandate to lie, because their mandate was to protect prohibition. So they've been lying to us for years, and they'll continue to protect their position. And there's many other people that will continue to do that to protect their position. So I'm here representing consumers and prospective licensees when I say, please weigh those concerns very carefully, because some of those concerns are not warranted in my opinion. Yeah, I'd be willing to answer any questions you did have. Like I said, I've already submitted info. I'm not going to take any more time here. But I appreciate this opportunity to share this information and speak for you all. And I hope that we can all work towards an equitable system here finally. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We don't want to keep talking about black and brown men and not hearing from them. So thank you for testifying.
Hi, good
Okay.
evening. My name is Lori Lucien, and I am a resident of Hyde Park, Massachusetts. I moved from Haiti in 2002, so I still consider myself a little bit of a newbie. But I'm here to basically provide my story with my process of seeking a license and the hardships that I faced and why I still haven't really initiated my process. And it really echoes some of the things that we've been speaking of, which is the financial barrier. So, having not grown up here, I do not have the connections that some of my classmates and some of my colleagues have, and who have had licenses granted to them. I do not know people who have that sum of money to just invest in me. And so that has been a very arduous process for me. And what has kept me from being discouraged is this community and how they've been able to mentor me and teach me how to navigate this process. And I think that moving forward, if we're going to institutionalize anything to help people of color, that is instituting some type of process, some type of group to which people of color can go to obtain information to help them navigate this process. And so my issue really has been financially supporting myself through this process because it doesn't allow you the opportunity to start small. Many businesses have the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to invest $50,000. I'm going to get things started, and that's the way that I'm going to proceed with my business. Having to require me to have $300,000 or $500,000 impedes that ability for me to start really small because you're telling me that you need this amount of money to ensure that you can continue and to ensure that you can grow your business. But what if my initial intent is to start really small so that I can learn, make small businesses that don't carry the immense financial risk of starting with $500,000? And so I think that thinking about this process, we should try to also think about ways to permit people to start smaller businesses so that so that we don't have this immense barrier to entry that I feel and that other people feel in our community. And so,
Right. Yeah.
Do you have a background in this industry?
no, but I am an attorney, so that also has helped that process. And I can also see how someone who doesn't have the ability to read documents and go through applications could be overwhelmed by the process. The immense amount of the information that's requested and in the format that it's requested can be a little bit overwhelming if you don't know, or even if you're unsure as how to present it in any way that a regulator might read and understand to the point where they could grant you the application. So even I'm overwhelmed by it, and I am in a better position than most people who might be applying.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How you guys doing today?
Good evening.
My name is Ross Bradshaw. I live in Auburn, Mass. I've been involved in the cannabis industry for about 2 years now. I work with the Ancillary Cannabis Company that educates people on cannabis in about 6 different states right now. And through my experience, one of the reasons why I think minorities and people of color aren't involved in this industry is the lack of education, the lack of letting people know that this is a legitimate business. If this ballot initiative does pass, I think what we're going to see is that Massachusetts is going to be the first state on the East Coast to legalize adult use cannabis. And I think that's going to be big. And I think what we need to do is educate people that this is a legitimate business that's going to create legitimate jobs, and it's going to create new business opportunities for people of color and for communities that have been affected by the war on drugs. And I think a lot of times when people hear about this new industry that are from those communities, they don't realize the impact 5-10 years down the line that this industry is going to have, and that there is a small opportunity to get involved if we do this right and we provide those opportunities for them. So my hope is that we don't lose sight of these individuals and these communities, because I think there is going to be somewhat of they call it the green rush, and that to me is a little unfortunate, because I think it loses the people along the way that have been locked out of this industry, the people that work in the black market. And there is a sense that we don't provide enough education that this is going to be a legitimate industry, and that there is opportunity to create a new industry here that's going to provide for people, and it's going to provide education, and it's also going to provide an opportunity to take a different approach that we've seen in Colorado, that we've seen in California. And I just hope that we educate these people, and we educate all individuals that this is going to happen, and that if this initiative does pass, that we provide the tools and resources. I personally work as an accountant, and we talked about this today, that not only the licensing process, but all of the other factors that go with it, whether it's lawyers, whether it's just people that have the background in the medical field to provide additional education, that we provide those sources, a place to go to where we can educate people on how to go about this licensing process.
So you travel to other states and you educate people on cannabis use. What type of education? What do you tell your people?
Yep.
And who are you dealing with?
So my company, we do in-home education. So we go directly to people's homes who don't necessarily want to be out in public at a head shop or a dispensary. We operate in 6
So
states.
they may be new patients, you mean? You show them how to use like a vaporizer or something?
Exactly. So we show them how to use the vaporizer, or we also teach them about the different strains of cannabis. And a lot of times, a lot of questions that we get are regarding this cannabis industry. How do I go about getting a license? How much does it cost? Are people really making money in this industry, or is it really just a pie in the sky type of idea? And it is legitimate. And I think that's something that needs to be communicated.
To make sure we get your information.
Thank
We were talking about keeping folks connected beyond this, so very much appreciate your testimony. We want to make sure that you're a part of any ongoing effort, so make sure we get your name.
Appreciate that.
Okay?
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to testify here tonight? Seeing no takers, I would like to ask Councilor Pressy if she'd like to have a closing statement.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've been here almost 3 hours, but I think it was very productive. I'm incredibly encouraged by what we heard here today. I had many hypotheses which have been confirmed, and I've also been enlightened to some barriers I hadn't thought of, and even some benefits that I had not thought of from an industry standpoint. So I think we're coming out of this with a decent roadmap heading into our working session. I appreciate everyone being so candid and so prescriptive in their recommendations. That will make ultimately what comes out of this that much stronger. And, ultimately, why I filed this order is I wanted us to get beyond impassioned talking points. Everyone kept speaking about this as an opportunity to right the injustices of the past. But how do we get to that beyond simple verbiage? And even once we institutionalize something, which I hope we will do, we know every law is only as good as its enforcement. So these are all things that we have to be considering in the development of policy. And, as far as an equity and opportunity of enterprise, both in workforce and ownership, that is really what this is about. Sam, in the history lesson that he was providing us, said that even then it was a matter of race and economics. And here we are in 2016, and it's still the same matter. So I thank all of you for your participation, all the advocates for continuing to educate us and to push us, forward in this space. And I thank the chairman for his facilitation of a very productive hearing. And I look forward to our working session on December 6th.
Thank you, Councilor. I just want to, in closing, I'm still undecided on question 4. I'm not thrilled about the way the medicinal marijuana was rolled out. I would like to see the state actually get that right before we open up to recreational. I'm concerned about certain areas of the city being flooded with dispensaries, and then none being in other parts of the city. Although this order was more about the equity piece, which I commend you on. I think we need to be talking about this in every industry, not just the marijuana industry. I find the marijuana industry to be heavily regulated at the top and where we're at the, not necessarily at the bottom, but we're on the street as a city council, our concerns are the closest to the street. So they're so regulated from the top, we have to worry about what it's actually going to look like when it comes into our community. So with that being said, I think it was a great hearing. Thank you all. This hearing is ended.